Perfect. Good evening. Welcome to the St. Helena Planning Commission for January 19th, 2016. And I would like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Koberstein? Commissioner Sweeney?
Present.
Commissioner Monette?
Here.
Vice Chair Kistner? Present. Chairperson Parker?
Yes. Moving on to public forum, this is an opportunity for the public to address the commission on items of interest to the public that are not listed on tonight's agenda. Because of restrictions imposed by the Brown Act, the commission may not engage in discussion nor take action on matters not described on the agenda. Please observe the time limit of 3 minutes. Do we have anyone who would like to speak at public forum?
Hello, Jeff Ellsworth, 1434 Sylvaner. A couple of months ago, some citizens from the town presented a petition to the City Council and Planning Commission, I believe, asking for language to regarding hotels and residential zones to be removed, and we were assured that it would be. However, I got a letter today saying there are still references in the general plan that would facilitate construction of hotels or lodging facilities in residential neighborhoods. For example, I'm going to read some of these. LU 2.1 and LU 2.8 includes the following verbiage. Properly designed hotel projects can be compatible with medium density residential and higher density residential zoning designations with frontage on regional connector or downtown mixed-use streets. There's ES 2.A, includes the following. Consider destination membership clubs and other potential lodging options that contribute to the transient occupancy tax revenue stream. It also enables fractional ownership, which is a transient use. ES 2.B removes the cap on number of restaurants and the cap on number of hotel and motel rooms. It also says allow consideration of lodging uses in medium density residential and higher density residential where the proposed lodging uses design features such as setbacks, building height, and landscaping are compatible with existing nearby residences. So we'll still be looking for more. There was some concern also that these were not redlined in the current version of the changes. So I heard from people saying they are confused and upset by this because we believe we presented a petition and were told that this would be removed, and it has not been. When the Davies issue came up and the applicant said verbally at a meeting that there would be no weddings, and later we went and found the resolution, and that language had not been put in there. So we just want to make sure that when we're coming up here and we're putting our focus and time on this, that everybody understands that we're going to be monitoring it, and we're hoping this is an oversight, but we just wanted to point out that this language is still there. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak at public forum? Seeing none, I'll move on to the consent items. We only have one item, the approval of the minutes from December 15th. Does anyone have any revisions, or do we have a motion?
I move to accept the consent item.
Second.
Commissioner Monette?
Yes.
Commissioner Vice Chair Kistner?
Yes.
Commissioner Koberstein?
Yes.
Commissioner Sweeney?
Yes.
Chairperson Parker?
Yes. Moving on to our public hearings. Our first one is a demolition permit and design review that was continued from our December 1st meeting for 1003 Charter Oak Avenue. Can we have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairperson Parker. As you mentioned, this item was continued from the December 1st meeting of the Planning Commission. At that meeting, the Planning Commission expressed concerns that the proposed guest cottage lacked the kitchen required to make it a true second unit, and felt that the home could be moved even farther from the northern property line away from the closest neighbor. The applicant agreed to a continuance and has since added the required kitchen to the guest cottage to make it a true second unit, and also moved the home an additional 30 feet away from the northern property line. The home is now approximately 70 feet away. As currently proposed, the home would be 3,899 square feet with a 400 square foot detached second unit and 462 square foot detached garage for 4,761 square feet total. With the FAR exemptions noted in the staff report, the project will consist of 4,161 square feet, which is 69 square feet less than the maximum square footage permitted for a FAR of 0.07. The original submittal was just 1 foot less than the maximum allowed. While there is a lot of square footage associated with the project, the parcel is very large and it can easily accommodate the building size. Furthermore, the massing of the structure is somewhat broken up between the home, second unit, and garage as they are each detached, although the separation is lessened by the fact that the breezeways are roofed. As stated in the plans, the new structures would be finished with stucco over ICF block walls, which is much more energy efficient than traditional wood framing. All roofing would be standing seam galvanized metal. Windows and doors would be constructed of recessed wood and metal cladding. The height of the proposed one-story home is approximately 26 feet to the top of the ridge, which is approximately 4 feet taller than the existing two-story home. Because of the size of the parcel, the home's location on the parcel, the fact that the proposed home is only 1 story, and because the parcel borders agricultural land on one side, staff believes that the project won't negatively affect neighboring properties and therefore recommends approval of the project. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Does anyone have any questions for staff at this time?
I am assuming that there are no fireplaces in this place.
There can be fireplaces, they just can't be wood burning.
That's what I meant.
Yeah,
Yeah,
correct.
okay.
Perfect. I'd like to invite the applicant to come forward if he so chooses. And open up the public hearing.
Sure. Nothing much to say. We think we've done what we're supposed to do. I don't have any further comments, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I don't.
Are you completely wedded to the current height?
Yeah, it's. I think it makes a big difference in terms of the the volume in the home, and it really adds a lot to the whole feel of it. So.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Would anyone else like to speak at public hearing? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and invite commissioner discussion. Commissioner Monette?
I'll start it off.
Yeah.
Commissioner Kistner?
I like the project. I think he's done what we've asked him to do. I like the fact that we've got at least some pictures of what the storyboard is, and I like the colors. I think it fits in. I think the lot is large enough that it will very easily handle that massiveness of that building, or that buildings. So I'm in support of the project.
Commissioner Sweeney?
Yeah, I echo what Commissioner Kistner said. I appreciate that they've gone to great lengths to absolutely reposition the project to a different portion and have done everything we've asked. So I think that we need to be very cognizant of that.
Commissioner Kuperstein?
I would only add with respect to the resiting of the house, one of our design review standards is compatibility with future construction on and off the site, and I think this is a better result if the rest of the property is ever developed at some time. And it's also, I think, a better relation to the other structures that are in the area.
Commissioner Monette?
Yeah, I agree with what other commissioners have said, although I do take some issue with having one of the reasons that it's met all the requirements that it's only 1 story, since it is 4 feet taller than the 2-story house. So, but there is no neighbors are complaining, and I'm sure it's been well thought out in terms of the design of the house, and I appreciate, that it will be beautiful. And so, but I just wanted to say that it's a 1-story house that's taller than a 2-story house. So. But I support the project. Yeah.
Thank you. I also support the project, and also am very thankful that you did take our comments into consideration and really implemented them with your project. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. Do we have a motion?
I move that the project exempt from the requirements of SEQA pursuant to Section 15301, which exempts demolition of existing structures, and Section 15303, which exempts the construction or conversion of small structures, including single-family residence, garages, pools, etc. And we accept the findings and approve a demolition permit and design review for the proposed resident located at 1003 Charter Oak Avenue.
Second.
Commissioner, or Vice Chair Kistner,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Commissioner Koberstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Yes.
Chairperson Parker.
Yes. Thank you very much. Moving on to our next item on our public hearing agenda is the demolition permit and design review for 2300 Vallejo Street. May we have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairperson Parker. I'd just like to note that the subject parcel is approximately 44,935 square feet. However, there is a 28-foot easement across the property frontage for the future widenings of Vallejo Street. Therefore, the developable parcel area is closer to 39,000 square feet. The existing parcel is currently developed at the 1,836 square foot, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1-story, single-family residence with a newly constructed 1,500 square foot detached garage with a home office and wine storage. It's approximately 3,336 square feet total. The applicant is seeking a demolition permit and design review approval to demolish the existing home in order to construct a new 1,733 square foot, 1-story, 1-bathroom, 1-bedroom, 1 full bathroom, 2 half-bathroom single-family residence for 3,233 square feet total for an overall decrease in square footage of 103 square feet. The new home would be finished with corrugated metal siding and roofing to match the existing garage. The height of the proposed 1-story home would be approximately 16 feet 6 inches, which is approximately 1 foot taller than the existing 15-foot 6-inch home. The applicant is proposing a total of 3,233 square feet. As I mentioned, 1,500 of that is the existing garage, and 1,733 is the new home. With the 200 square foot FAR exemption for covered parking, the project will consist of 3,033 square feet, which is approximately 2,950 square feet less than the maximum square footage permitted for a FAR of just 0.08. The project as proposed meets all the requirements of the LR1A zoning district, including lot size, building size, setbacks, etc. The parcel size is large enough. The new home is modest in size, located near the center of the property, and is only 1 story in height. For these reasons, staff feels the proposed home will not negatively affect neighboring properties and recommends approval of the project. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Are there any questions for staff?
I just had one. I was confused on the pictures. The view, there are a couple of photos of what's to be removed, and from the narrative and from the plans, it looked like the garage stays in place because that's the existing office, right?
That's correct.
And so on these pictures, it says the garage and house to be removed.
Yeah, that's incorrect.
Okay,
That's
so
a
that's
typo.
what I
So the
thought.
garage stays, the
That's
house
what I thought, and then
goes.
they're
Yeah.
building around. That's
Yeah.
okay. That's what I thought.
Any other questions for staff? All right, I'd like to open up the public hearing and invite our applicant to come up if he should so choose.
I'm Bruce Keckbrad, 2320 Vallejo Street. Be happy to answer any questions on our project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and invite commissioner discussion.
I do need to close. I drove by the project, but I haven't spoken to Bruce about it.
I walked by today. I didn't speak to anyone. I just wanted to see where it was, and it's just such a beautiful location. And it's and I really appreciate that the new house is going to be smaller than the old house, and I think there's plenty of room. And it's I totally support the project. It looks wonderful.
It's going to be a dramatic improvement visually on the site
For the
and for the
neighborhood.
street. Yeah. Oh, I just said it was.
She just
I think
added
she
the
just was,
comment.
I was adding to what you said. Yeah, sorry.
would anyone else like to? Commissioner
I like the
Koberstein?
project a lot. I really like I really like the materials they're using. I think it looks really nice.
Yeah, I think the street as a whole has a wide mix of different architectural styles, and I don't have any issue at all. I think it's going to look much better when the cottage looks like, the barn. I think it's a nice design.
I agree, and I appreciate you providing us with the materials you're going to use. We always like to see what's going to be there. And do we have a motion?
We've determined the project is exempt from the requirements of SEQA pursuant to Section 15301, which exempts demolition of existing structures, and Section 15303, which exempts the construction or conversion of small structures, including single-family residence, garages, pools, etc. We accept the findings and approve a demolition permit and design review for the proposed remodeling and expansion of the residence located at 2300 Vallejo Street.
Second.
Commissioner Kistner,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Yes.
Commissioner Koberstein,
Yes.
and Chairperson Parker.
Yes. Thank you very much. Moving on to our next agenda item. This is a use permit for 661 Main Street. I was actually reading it, just Main Street. May we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Chair Parker, members of the commission. Before I get started, I just want to introduce Xenia Gamero. She's here from City Hall. She's our new admin assistant, and she's helping out and trying to do some cross-training with Jim there. So I just wanted to introduce her, and she's been a very nice addition to the planning department. Half-time for us and half-time for the city clerk. The item before you tonight is a use permit application to open and operate a new winery and tasting room, winery office, and tasting room at 661 Main Street in the Service Commercial Zoning District. The project site's actually a 5.67 acre parcel developed with 2 multi-tenant retail buildings which front onto Main Street and numerous other structures throughout the parcel, including some single-family homes. There are approximately 32 parking spaces directly adjacent to the retail buildings, which are intended to serve those. However, the overall site includes approximately 84 parking spaces, and the applicant has provided a parking summary for all uses on the site for your review. The project, as mentioned, proposes a new approximately 1,600 square foot wine tasting room and winery office within the existing, one of the existing suites at 661 Main Street. That's the northernmost suite, and there's a rendering there of the existing building. Office hours are proposed from 10 to 5 daily. However, the conditions were written to allow some flexibility, and they're currently written from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. So if the commission has any input on that, just to point that out. Wine tastings are identified as by appointment, and the applicant proposes 3 full-time and 2 part-time employees. And the applicant's identified tastings by approximately 10 groups of various sizes are anticipated throughout the week. However, there was no proposed cap for the total number of daily visitors or the total size of a group. Staff identified that no group should exceed 20 individuals. However, again, that's just kind of something for the commission to review, and if there's any direction or concern over that size, staff did communicate that there may be some input from the commission on that issue. Again, that was just a number that staff came up with because there wasn't one in the application. And the applicant can speak to any questions if there's certain questions about sizes or the intent. And that you would want to look at condition number 13, which identifies the maximum number of individuals tasting it to be 20 at any one time. The general plan for the site is also service commercial. It's intended to provide service and retail uses, including restaurants, gas stations, motels, public and quasi-public uses, and are primarily intended for uses that are automobile-oriented or at least not located in the core downtown or the central business district. So that's the distinction made in the general plan. Staff identified some general plan policies in the staff report, which we found the project to implement. The zoning, as mentioned, is service commercial. The definition of service commercial is also provided in the staff report, and staff did find that the project meets the intent of the zoning district. There's some analysis of the parking, and staff found that the current retail uses fronting onto Main Street would require 28 spaces. Again, there's 32 spaces provided, so there's no parking deficiencies for the spaces directly adjacent to the site. And then obviously there's numerous spaces available on the property should they be needed. Staff found the project to qualify for a Class 1 categorical exemption as discussed in the staff report. The water neutrality analysis originally conducted for the project site identified that there was adequate water under the current uses. However, it identified a maximum of 12 visitors per day for the appointments by tasting. Since the project was conditioned to allow up to 20, the applicant revised that, and a copy of that revision has been provided on the dais for your review, and copies for the public have been provided. The short kind of point to that being that there is adequate water for the business to serve up to 20 individuals per day for tasting, and so there is expected to be some excess capacity if that's lowered at all. Given all that, staff identified from the staff perspective that the project meets the use permit findings and is recommending approval of the project. There were no issues identified in the analysis, and no correspondence was received in the review of the project. With that, staff's available for any questions, and as is the applicant and the property owner.
Any questions for staff?
I have some comments, but I think I'll wait till after that I'd sent to you.
I have a question about the 20. I mean, the water analysis is based on 20 people per day. Your condition is 20 at a time.
And that was going to be my talk, but is that something we should wait till after the presentation?
So again, there was no numbers provided for the size of the groups or the number of patrons per day. It just said by appointment, and so staff, trying to address that kind of unanswered question, put out a number of 20 for a maximum group size. However, if the commission has concerns over that or thinks a different number may be appropriate, that potential has been communicated to the applicants. And just to be brief, we did the numbers, 20 people per day. Say you did 360 days a year. The applicant indicated they probably don't even make enough wine to provide that many.
But it does stay with the land. So I
Yes,
guess the
it does.
question that I would have is, do we discuss this now, or do we have the applicant present and then bring it up in commissioner discussion?
Yeah, so we should open the public. This is just a time for questions for clarity,
Right.
and then open the public hearing if there's any additional information, and then commission discussion.
Are there any other questions for staff, though?
I have one other kind of crazy question. Why is the traffic in that parking lot directed in a certain direction? You know, the parking in the front, when you come in, if you enter off the southernmost access drive, you're essentially driving against sort of the flow of the traffic and the way the cars are parked there.
There's numerous uses on the site, and the property owner's here as well, and he could probably provide a little bit better information regarding that.
I think we should make it one way.
All right. I'm going to open up the public hearing and invite the applicant to come up to answer our questions.
Good evening, Rodney Friedrich. I'm the owner of the property. I'm happy to answer any questions. It sounds like you have a few. I think the one that was brought up about the 20 people per group, this was something that was done at the staff level. We were asked if we were okay with that. That's not what we had proposed, and we simply said yes. I mean, it was just something that was given to us, not something that we had proposed. It would be a typical group size would be 2 to 6 people. I would hope that it might be up to 8, so we don't overstep a limit if 7 people show up or whatever. But would be a typical group size. As far as your street thing that you asked about, we put up a one-way sign on that street, or not on that parking area. It's been there for quite a while. I can't tell you why people go the other way.
Okay. And Rodney, my question is really around total maximum capacity, and I know. Oh, I'm sorry. It's not. And my question is really more on total visitor count. I know Mike doesn't have enough wine to support thousands and thousands of guests. However, because this, whatever we approve rides with the land, the way staff has written this, if we did 20 individuals per tasting and they did a tasting on the hour, I mean, you're talking tens of thousands of guests in a potential year. And I know that's not at all in Mike's business plan. However, again, I would want to see some kind of limitation around that, and I think that something to speak to what they're asking for, if you're talking about 10 groups a week, even if we up that number and make it something, in the neighborhood of 7,500 to 10,000 a year or whatever, but just something that is a more reasonable use in the perpetuity for that site. Because someone could come in with more wine.
We're more than happy to agree to that. As you may be aware, we've had other wine tasting facilities on that property on
Yeah.
the same legal parcel. We've never had 10,000
No.
people a year in those existing facilities that were operational at that time.
My concern is echoes Commissioner Koberstein's. I think that that the number of people who come a day should not exceed what the water report is based on. I mean, I think that those things really
and
have to match.
our letters to
Yeah, they
to
don't.
that are in line with that.
Yeah.
This did not get raised by us. This was, I mean, I don't want to put no in a bad position, but this was not something that we proposed at that level. Our proposal was consistent with the water analysis report.
Then I would like to see that.
Yeah. 20
It's-
guests
it's
a day
in our
is a
letter.
totally different thing, and that's something that's very reasonable.
So rather than, if there's interest in a limit from staff's perspective, rather than an annual or even maybe a maximum group size, it may be best to limit the total number of daily tastings that can be provided or tasting customers.
Or
and
even
that-
weekly to give you flexibility if they're going to, if they want to combine that with limited staff, they may prefer to do just a few tastings a week, but have a larger if they have space capacity. So it's really the aggregate number of people.
Just
It has to
from a
match the water analysis. I mean, that's my.
From a staff's perspective, it's difficult to know if on a daily basis you could kind of show up and see how many people are there, versus if to know whether they're the 100th customer or the 101st customer per week. We would have no way of knowing that.
Okay.
Would you be keeping track of that? I mean, so that so that there could be some tracking by the city in terms of water mainly.
Well, the water can be tracked because it's on a water meter basis. I mean, that building is a separately metered building.
Right, but we'd be approving this tonight
Right.
based on this water analysis, and I don't want to just be a token. I mean, it seems to me that what this is based on is what's a water neutral result, and I think that's important to maintain.
And we're in agreement with that.
Yeah.
We're in total agreement with not exceeding what was done in the water analysis neutrality report.
I'm just thinking, if you are wildly successful beyond your dreams here, and you started to note that there were more, that there would be some adjustments done somehow. That's all. And I was wondering, I mean, you'll be keeping track of people who are coming there. Yeah.
They will definitely keep track of the people that are there, yes.
And
I have a couple follow-up questions.
Go ahead.
How long does an appointment last? I mean, is this something that's an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours? I'm just trying to get an idea on how many groups you might have through in a day. 4 or 5 at the most, or?
I'm watching the current wine tasting rooms that we have on our property right now. I see probably 4 to 5 groups, maybe on a weekend, and less on a weekday.
And how do you enforce the appointment only? We had a very small wine tasting use permit a couple of meetings ago. But it was a building that was really kind of hidden, and the entrance was probably not visible to anybody. Here you're more in sort of a strip center where other people are going to be there. How do you enforce the appointment only if somebody just walks in the door and wants to have a tasting?
Well, in all honesty, that is a tough. I mean, it's a very tough way to say, well, you can't come in here just because you want to buy some of our wine. I would say that's very difficult to enforce, not just for our particular wine tasting, but Napa County wide, as it applies to all these rules for appointment only. I can see where if somebody's coming and saying, I would like to make an appointment, I'm at your gate, are you going to turn them away?
Okay.
I mean,
I've seen some websites where you clearly have to go on ahead of time and you have to register and make your appointment. You can't just, if you show up, you may or may not be able to taste. But
well, I think if there's a tasting going on, that would be, then you wouldn't have somebody come in the door and duplicate
Join in.
that. But I mean, I think it's a very valid question, and I don't think that there's a realistic answer to that question not just for this city, but across the county.
And this may be a reason for a maximum number of tastings per day, because then they could clearly say, well, we're at our maximum, come back tomorrow. Maybe one way to address it.
I have a question for you, Ronnie. Are you comfortable with us just doing a maximum number of guests a day, just to lend some flexibility to the size of the group? So you could do a group.
Sure. Yeah.
You could do 5 groups of 4, or you could just do one group of 20, just to kind of accommodate what's.
Well, I'd like to have the groups match the water analysis, neutrality analysis report. So with the
20
number,
a day.
I think the number of people that we're asking to be allowed to come into the tasting room.
The one that we were given this evening,
Right.
not in the packet.
Right.
Okay.
That's correct.
So then we could do a maximum guests per day and a maximum per week, per month, if you really needed to just kind of math it out for that, just to watch the water neutrality. But we can discuss that later. I
Just
just
leave
wanted
it
to
at
make sure that you were comfortable
Just
with
leave it at
that.
20 a day. The applicant's
Yeah.
happy with that.
Yeah.
I think that was the sentiment behind staff. It's a sort of new language, so they threw in a number that the math doesn't work, but the math works at 20 a day.
So what do you think, though, of the idea of taking out the by appointment only, simply because it's
It
disingenuous?
has to be by appointment only because of the county rules.
Yeah, it has to be consistent with the
that's
county. And the county's
disingenuous.
grappling with the same thing, but, it's a,
But I'm actually we're getting a little bit too discussion-y
so
right
too.
now in the public hearing, so if Rodney, if you have anything else that you'd like to add to this, would
Only
love
to
to.
answer any other
Are
questions.
there any
at
other
the time.
questions?
I just have a question about the hours. The staff recommendation is 9 in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, which is a little more expansive than I think you said 10 to 5 in your application. What are you comfortable with?
10 to 5 is fine.
Okay.
I believe that's what our others are right now.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this item?
Jeff Ellsworth, 1434 Sylvaner. I appreciated the applicant suggesting the idea of tying the visitation to the water neutrality. I think that that's maybe a good way of making sure it's limited. I think we have to, as was pointed out, all these go with the land. And while the people that we know and trust in town, we know will be here to protect us. If the property sells, we don't know what that next person may do. And so having the language as tight as possible, because there are a lot of very smart, very wily attorneys out there who can find a way to, as you said, somehow get 20,000 people into something that obviously wasn't intended to be that. So I think we just have to make sure there's enough cross-referencing in the language to make sure that it stays at a regulated place. Because I think the enforcement issue, it's happening all around the county. We're seeing use permits being violated. We're seeing nobody really knowing what to do. I think it's got to be a discussion where the owners of the properties really get into helping us come up with a solution to protect our communities. What is the enforcement mechanism that lets them profit and operate a business that succeeds, but at the same time doesn't encroach on the roads, water, or the safety of the citizens? One of the issues I continue to bring up is something called binge tourism. And when we have many alcohol-serving businesses motivated to fill their customers up with more alcohol and competitive with each other, we start seeing a problem. It happens in other towns. It happens in spring break towns. It happens in Spain and Barcelona. They're having a terrible problem. So how do we, celebrate and sell the product that we make here in a way that doesn't damage our community or make it unlivable? So I think that those enforcement mechanisms we need to start the discussion now. We really do. We're on the verge of a very serious problem on the county level, the town level, and on a regional level as well. So I just wanted to bring that up, and I do think that the visitation tied to the water neutrality thing is a good way to do it, and then just making sure there's extra language in there to make sure that, if we're saying I don't know, however many events, and we want to know what our maximums may be weekly or whatnot. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this agenda item? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and invite commissioner discussion. Part 2.
I can start. And as a disclosure point, I am in the wine industry myself, so just put that out there. I think overall the project's, I can support the project. I feel that the applicant will maintain a good product and be consistent with the resolutions and with the limitations we put, which is why I also think it's important just for consistency with the size of that property and with the water neutrality and everything else that we do. My only request would be for item 13 that you change the wording from limited to a maximum of 20 individual tastings at any one time to a limit of 20 per day, and keep it simple.
20 people per day?
20 people. Yeah, 20 tasters.
I just wanted to clarify that. You said 20, it could have been 20 tastings or 20.
Well, 20 visitors, 20 tasters.
Okay, good, thank you.
Per day. I don't believe that we should mandate how he packages his tastings or any of that. It needs to be up to their business planning. But 20 guests per day, I think, is a reasonable number. That still puts them north of 7,000 guests in a year. That's very reasonable for the size of wine production. And then echoing a little bit what Mary said, I don't know about, I think the 5 o'clock is reasonable. It's also consistent with other wineries in the industry, in the area. And there's lots of reasons behind why wineries close at the times they do. So I think going back to what the applicants requested, if you want to expand it to 9 o'clock, that's fine. But I don't know that we would need to go later. I don't think that's required. But other than that, I think it's a great project, and I'm sure it'll be a nice addition to Rodney's space.
Perfect. Thank you. Commissioner Monette?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, it's probably not possible, but like if there could be a monthly accounting of, and if the, and something in there that would say, if the numbers started to go up, that there would be, that there would be some adjustments, a new water analysis based on maybe some changes, so that it would allow for it to at least to make some attempts to expand and retain, not just for this owner but for future owners, and remain water neutral. That there would be, I don't know, does the city monitor any of this?
I would say that would be unfair to put that kind of onus on this applicant when we have, I don't know how many wineries we have in city. I should know that, but I don't.
But is that possible to do in a general way?
I think that becomes a little onerous.
So,
I totally agree with it, yeah.
just to speak to the.
That needs to be done outside this discussion.
I agree.
And I think maybe we say as a commission we'll keep current with what's happening countywide and over time. But I think to put that on this applicant.
No, okay,
not right.
I hear you. I agree. Perhaps it's inappropriate to bring it up here, but it came up in my brain, and also in response to the public comment. I think in terms of water, especially, and there isn't any accountability at this point, and for a lot of reasons, and I'm wondering if that can happen, if we can have this discussion, if we can start discussing these things in the future.
I think there is a fair amount of accountability, given that folks are required to provide water neutrality and define or document that their projects are water neutral, and then the city does monitor all their water use through meters. Mm-hmm. So I think there is a fair amount of accountability through new development projects.
Okay. So if the water use started to go up, then what would you do? I mean, is there anything to do?
I think Steve
Mr.
has our
Palmer's here,
answer.
Yeah.
I'll try and weigh in a little bit on this. It is something our water conservation coordinator looks at. Obviously, her role is very large, and there's lots of things for her to look at. So I can't speak to the priority of these kind of things right now. But we do look at the bills periodically, and we do monitor. And can't speak to this project particularly, but when we notice things that are not in line with what they should be, we do reach out to the customer and let them know that they're exceeding what their water use is supposed to be.
And not just for uses, but also there might be a leak that, that needs to be fixed.
Right.
Okay, thank you. That gives me some direction. Yeah.
Steve, are each one of these buildings in this complex individually metered?
I believe Rodney said yes, they were. But they each have separate water meters.
Yeah, I guess I should have asked Rodney that question.
I'm going to open up the public hearing for Rodney to answer our question.
Thank you.
Specifically.
The particular building that you're looking at now, or that we're talking about now, you had a map there are 3 spaces in that building. That's on 1 water meter. Then you have Napa Soap and Nimbus Arts. That's on a separate water meter. I think we have about 20 water meters total on our property.
Okay.
Can you put a sub-meter in?
Be very difficult the way those pipes are because it goes directly inside and under concrete floors almost immediately. I do not know how that transfers underneath those floors. We calculated the water analysis based upon the clinical lay use and known uses for what clinical lay was doing, and that's how we came upon the water analysis that was presented, and then that's how our application was submitted. But our application was also submitted based upon history of what our other wine tasting permits or our wine tasting uses are doing at the present time. But it would be very difficult to meter that separately.
I have one more question for you, Ronnie. So that building shares with the chamber and then the Bodega Shipping?
Bodega Shipping.
Okay, so their water's not going to be crazy all over the place. So if there is any water change to the water meter, it's going to be significant enough that they'll know.
That's right.
All right.
Yeah, you should have. You should have seen a drop in water usage, and you can obviously go back to the records. So when Clinical Lay moved out, there would have been a drop in water usage, but you're going to see that go back up to the rough. Well, it'll probably be less than what it was with Clinical Lay. We had quite a group in there, a number of doctors and patients and so forth. So I'm pretty sure you're not going to see the same number go back up, but it will go back up.
Not the same amount of hand washing. All right, perfect. Thank you. I'm going to close the public hearing. Thank you, Rodney, and continue our discussion.
I just really want to appreciate Mr. Friedrich's sensitivity and willingness to compromise and work with everyone that you've had to work with. I appreciate that very much. Most of my concerns are with, as all this stuff goes with the land, is with someone who might not be as careful and thoughtful as someone else mentioned on the commission. So, I support the project otherwise.
Thank you.
Is general discussion, is that what
Still general, yeah, it's still general discussion.
Okay. Okay. One thing I noted about this is in the application itself, it talks about painting and upgrading the storefront so that it looks more like the Chamber of Commerce. The only thing I see in our conditions is that the construction has to be in compliance with approved plans and exhibits. So I take it that means that we will get a painted and redone storefront, which is one of the objectives of developing, the southern part of.
So staff looked at the proposed language of just what you quoted, had some concerns, went to the site. The front of the building is almost the same as the front of the chamber, except for they may replace some of the landscaping and repaint it. So none of that would require design review, so there's no design review application.
Okay. I mean, generally, I continue to struggle with what things are tourist-oriented and what is not. And this is one of those uses that, if done one way, it can definitely be tourist-oriented. This particular application to me is more like the previous one that we dealt with, and I really feel that the 20-person limit a day keeps it in the realm of what the zoning ordinance, intends us to do. I agree that we should change it to 20 people a day, and I think the hours of 9 to 5 make sense for what they're going to be doing there.
Commissioner Kistner?
I totally agree with what Mary's just said. I agree with what Tracy said, and I'm in support of the project. I have nothing else to add. You got it all.
I would just like to add that I think that with Commissioner Koberstein's comments of keeping it with the size and the scope of the project, this is a kind of a consolidation of an office in Angwin and an already existing tasting room on Fulton Avenue. They've expanded a little bit, and they're just trying to find a space that fits their needs. I'm very happy that we're sticking with the 20 persons per day, and that this isn't in downtown St. Helena. It's in the new the South Commercial Service Center, and I think it's great that we're expanding St. Helena down in that direction. Would like to just add one more condition to it, and I spoke with Noah about this, that make sure that it complies with all ABC and liquor laws, and have that be one of the conditions, as I'd like to see all tasting rooms have that condition as well. And if, with that, I'd like to see a motion.
Do you mean,
Wineries have to follow certain laws that.
right, I know there's a public comment period if there are applications. I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by the ABC, because I know has that already happened, or I don't understand.
The applicant's going to be required to comply with alcohol beverage control requirements of the state. And Chairperson Parker just has requested previously that all alcohol-related uses essentially be reminded of that requirement by a condition on the project.
But there will.
We're not asking to do something different.
No, I understand, but I know there's a comment period for when someone does apply with ABC.
It won't change.
So we can make a decision before that happens.
We're required to make the decision before ABC can approve any alcohol-related use.
Oh, okay, so we have to come first. All right, got it.
Do we have a motion?
I move that the project is categorically exempt from the requirements of CEQA under a Class 1 categorical exemption as an existing facility, and we accept the findings and approve the use permit for the proposed winery office and wine tasting room at 661 Main Street.
Can we just make that subject to changing conditions 13 and 14?
Yeah. Would you add that, please?
An addition of whatever would be 17 or whatever. I don't know how many conditions.
The hours?
No, the ABC stuff. So would that be adding,
Condition
I guess,
15? Yes, thank you. Do we have a second?
second?
Vice Chair Kistner,
Yes.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Yes?
Commissioner Koberstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Chairperson Parker.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question related to this at all at this point? No?
Can you ask it Noah privately after the meeting?
Yes.
Thank you. Moving on to our new business. Thank you, Rodney. This is the planning commission to consider and recommend amendments to the city of St. Helena municipal codes, section 17.08, 180, 1624.060, and 1624.10 to establish a uniform 14-day appeal period, and we're going to get a staff report explaining that.
Yeah, I'll keep this brief. This item is essentially a code cleanup housekeeping item, as there are inconsistencies in several sections of the municipal code with regards to the number of days that an appeal can be filed. Most places in the code have a 14-day appeal period, and some, as noted in the staff report, have 10. The proposed changes are intended to establish a consistent and uniform appeal period throughout the municipal code. In addition, Municipal Code Section 17.08.110 states that an approved permit or other discretionary approval is transferable to any future owner of the subject property. Thus, there may be occasions where the planning director needs to determine at an administrative level whether or not a proposed use is consistent with a previously approved use permit. However, there is no built-in notification or appeal procedure for such a decision. Municipal Code Section 1:1610 states that any administrative decision made by an official of the city pursuant to any of the provisions of the municipal code may be appealed in writing to the city council by filing with the city clerk a written notice of such an appeal, setting forth the specific grounds thereof. Thus, a notification and appeal process needs to be created to address this situation. In addition, there are other director-level decisions that warrant notification, but there are no established protocols directing when this notification should be sent. Staff therefore recommends that the Planning Commission recommend that the City Council adopt the attached amendments to the city's zoning ordinance as described in the staff report and is contained in Attachment A. I'd be happy to try and answer any questions you may have at this time.
Are there any questions for staff? I appreciate you trying to clean this all up to be a consistent 14 days so there aren't questions when people come up to the front desk.
Yeah, I have a question. Okay, let's say that at the discretion of the director, when an administrative decision has the potential to generate significant public interest, the director shall notify all the property owners within 300-foot radius. Will any objection from any, will one objection from the 300 notified people kick it to the planning commission? Is there any rule about that? I mean, so what if you get one objection, 10 objections? Do you decide how many objections will do that, or what?
There's nothing in these changes that talk about when a item goes to the planning commission. What this says is, if an administrative decision is made by the director, the applicant is required to be provided notice of that administrative decision. It then gives the director the discretion to decide if additional notification is warranted for folks within 300 feet of the property affected by the decision. So the thinking behind this is, if a decision is made to deny something to an individual, they're going to get notification of that, and they'll have the ability to appeal it. If a decision is made to approve something, but there has been input from concerned neighbors regarding a potential approval at a staff level, then that would be a justification for the director to also notify the folks within 300 feet, so they would have the opportunity to appeal it.
So any person coming to you and saying, I don't like this, would perhaps, I mean, would automatically get you to do a notification then?
Well, there's nothing automatic in it because it's at the discretion of a person.
Okay.
But generally, the staff was looking at options for how to provide notice to folks that a decision has been made that they want to appeal, and there's not very many opportunities in the code for a staff level decision. I mean, it's essentially a sign, some signs, I should say, not even all signs. And other determinations kind of similar to the one that was brought before the commission regarding the harvest stand and brewing. So it's, that was just an administrative determination as to the need for a discretionary approval or not. So in kind of looking at some of the things like approving a fence because of the configuration of a parcel or something, putting a notice on private property as the mechanism to notify the public seemed to be a challenge because there's nothing specific in the code that would talk about the size of that notice, where it would be located, how long it would have to be up, all of those things. And so just looking at the procedures currently adopted and the potential options for how to get the word out that a decision has been made in these very limited circumstances, staff felt that it was the best mechanism would be to give some discretion as to when it should be noticed to let folks know that a decision was made.
Okay.
I mean,
And
it's
for clarity,
very limited.
So I understand. I mean, there's already code around a 14-day notice. All you're doing is saying you now have you've codified that you have to send out information to these folks so they know that it's happening, that the clock's ticking.
That's
Otherwise,
exactly
they just
right.
had to be paying attention, and we're now putting the onus back on the city to say, you've got to let people know so the clock officially starts
So
ticking.
Bobby, a good
I'm more
example.
concerned with the public, not the people who might want
But
to
this
appeal.
actually is better. Now they're being told, now that we've put onus on the city through code to say you have to notify people. You just
They
don't
notify
have
the
to hold them
applicants.
accountable to be paying attention, which
So
is what
Bobby, a
happened
good
before.
example would be the jewelry store.
Yeah.
Remember that when we had that, and it was following use permit, so it didn't require a public hearing. But then the other neighbors around it got upset and appealed it. It would be like, this is a jewelry store. That's a hot trigger item. I'm going to notice the 300-foot radius that this is coming in, even though the permit itself doesn't come to us because it's following
I
the
understand.
use permit.
I just wondered if there was some mechanism to, if NOAA may not think that it is of interest to
This
a
is
lot
what
of
this
people,
does. It says
and
if
they-
a decision is made, now you've triggered it, right? Isn't that
Well,
what
it
it's saying?
gives discretion to the director
Still.
as to when to send the notice to the surrounding property owners based on the perceived interest. The thing I'd like to point out is if the staff person doesn't make the appropriate decision and doesn't notice it, and there's interest, that will be known and that will be pointed out probably to all of you and all of the city council members, who would then ask me why I didn't do that, or whoever's in my chair.
It just protects the citizens a little bit more, that they actually, if they don't get notice, then they can come be like, but this generates significant public interest, and it kind of opens up the window again for them.
Sometimes it's after the fact, though, if they're not noticed. But I mean, I'm hearing what you're saying. I just wondered if there would be any objective standard to automatically kick it for public notice.
I mean, following up on that, I have a question about this paragraph 3. It says that you're going to provide notice of the decision has been provided as required by law. I mean, that seems to be superfluous language unless there is some requirement that we're referring to.
With other, or with certain types of decisions, you're required to notice them.
How?
Well, it would be as directed by whatever the law is pertinent to those individual decisions.
Could you give us an example without putting you in the spot for that?
I mean, I just would like this to be clear to people who are relying on it or intending to, so that they know if proper notice has been given and we don't get into a big hullabaloo over when the 14-day period started and
Well,
all of that.
so in the one situation that we're aware of where no notice was given, that basically created a situation where there was no ending to when it could be appealed. So once people got wind that a jewelry store had been deemed to be compliant with the approved use permit as a continuing use, and other folks who had concerns about that jewelry store opening said, hey, you never noticed me. I never had an opportunity to appeal this. And it was, I don't know, a few months after the decision. So then we looked at it and said, you're right. And because we didn't do our job as staff to provide you an opportunity to appeal it within 14 days of our decision, we now have to give you that opportunity to appeal it 30 days after the decision because we didn't do our job.
Okay, but so what you're saying is the words "as required by law" really only relate to the notice that you have to give to the applicant. Is that right?
I wouldn't say it's that limited because there could be other laws depending on the use type that could trigger additional noticing.
Okay.
I don't have an example right now, but
Yeah.
frankly, it's catch-all language provided by the attorney.
Yeah.
So the only thing I would bring up, and I understand that this could become onerous on staff. I don't want to add work on things that are non-controversial that no one is going to appeal anyway. But you're saying the wording at the discretion of the director, I think, is what Bobby potentially is objecting to. So are there categories of things we don't ever have appeals on that?
Well, just from a staff perspective, I mean,
Yeah. I don't
how
wanna have
many
paperwork.
when I make an administrative decision or the director makes an administrative decision, it's typically regarding is your use consistent with an approved use permit? So that's probably the one that's going to be the most controversial, just to be frank, and we have examples of when that was
Right.
made, and it's been controversial the only 2 times I've ever seen it made. Once when I made that decision, and then once, 6 months before I started. So those would both be instances where the director would choose to provide notice because the director needs to do their job. But 90% of the time, it's regarding the location of a fence.
Yeah.
What's the front of my property? What's my fence setback? I mean, they're such
don't wanna
low-level
create
minor
paperwork.
decisions. And then trying to think about, well, am I going to send out a notice to everyone and people not going to understand the notice? I'm going to get 10 phone calls on why I determined that a fence could go on this property line. I mean, you start to get into a lot of kind of busy work to some extent for a staff of 2 people on these administrative level decisions. So one distinction could be on residential parcels versus commercial, but we have just as much interest on residential development as commercial development here in town.
Then I think I would say leave it at your discretion. We have to have faith in the staff.
That's
and
what I'm asking.
If then we trip forward, we come back and tighten it up, but leave it open-ended. You've created a clock mechanism. You've given some code around people's concerns, and then let it roll for a while would be
I
my
have
recommendation.
ultimate faith in Noah and this current staff. I do, but we don't always have the staff. But I guess what I'm thinking is that, and I hear what you're saying. I totally appreciate it, what you just said. And I also am thinking you can't really know if there are any concerns unless you let people know what's going on. And some of them might have something that you overlooked or that you hadn't thought of. So I guess it's which way you're going to err. I always want to err in the direction where the public gets the most possible notice they can. I can see that's I can understand reasons why that wouldn't necessarily be your preference. So anyway, that's where I'm coming from.
Maybe in the case of something that you think is bigger than a fence, it could be part of your staff report to the Plan Commission at the end of our meetings. We meet every 2 weeks. People would hear about it. It would be on the agenda that's published, online. It would be a way of putting the larger ones in your discretion, what you think is larger, out there, so people have some notice of it.
I love that idea. Yeah, that's a great idea. I know you. Does everybody else like that? Because Noah likes to know if everyone on the commission is in agreement.
I don't want to just haphazardly say something that could open up a ball of paperwork worms. I just think that
For more explore, just for
until this is a
exploration.
problem, I say support it.
I
However,
agree
it's
with
better than we
Commissioner
were.
Sweeney. Until it becomes a problem.
My
and
feeling is if there's a problem, they're going to hear about it if they didn't do their job.
this right here is
When-
addressing the problem
Yeah.
with the jewelry
it's
stores and the
just
use
the
permits.
opposite.
There have been problems.
If it's okay with
We
them,
hear about
you're not
them.
going to hear
I
about it.
think we have to have more problems. There already have been problems.
Well, the only reason I'm suggesting is that I think it compresses the time.
Yeah.
If there is something that is fairly big and you put it out there through that mechanism, you're not subject to somebody saying 2 months later, I didn't hear about it, the appeal time is still running. There would be a definite.
Staff has no problem with creating a section in the kind of procedures of the planning commission that staff would then flag any administrative decision that was made. And getting to your point, it would allow a stronger decision or further support the time when the clock does start for an appeal, because every 2 weeks someone gets noticed.
Yeah.
And that's excellent.
Okay.
And it doesn't even need a point we discuss. It's just on there, listed.
And-
Yeah.
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 I mean, we don't even have to mention it.
It
It's
wouldn't
in
be
there. It's
up
in the notes.
for
Read it.
discussion.
No, it would not.
Because it's not.
What is about to be appealed?
Okay, and I was just, I mean, if you already can say that can happen, that's cool. I was just wanting to give a unanimous go-ahead to explore it if you weren't sure, but, okay.
All right. So do we have a motion to recommend this to City Council?
So moved to, where's my resolution?
We recommend that the planning commission recommend to the city council to adopt the attached amendments to the city zoning ordinance as described in this staff report and as contained in attachment A.
Do we want to add what Noah just is going to add? No, that doesn't.
Yep.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Vice Chair Kistner,
Yes.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Yes.
Commissioner Koberstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Chairperson Parker.
Yes. Moving on to our next item of business, this is the review of the Planning Commission bylaws to improve meeting procedures and ensure consistency with current practice.
Thank you, Chair Parker.
And we were given a cross out, just everyone has that.
Yeah, and my apologies for not providing the red line or the cross strike through red text version. Originally, there were some formatting issues that I was struggling with, but I had some assistance from staff, and we were able to get that completed today. So, it was my goal just to go over the bylaws individually, the areas where some changes were made, and then to also provide some supplemental information regarding ex parte, just to further define it, and then also to adding items to future agendas. Commissioner Koberstein had asked staff a question about that. And rather than replying to everyone, staff's just proposing to provide additional summaries on it here, and then that'll facilitate the discussion. So, and just the final step is that for the bylaws to be in effect, the city council actually has to approve them. So this will be going to the city council after we finalize them from the planning commission perspective. So obviously the first rule number 1 was modified. I had reviewed my notes, and there was a discussion or a desire to change the date to January. There was some commissioners have since brought up concerns over changing that to January and potentially leaving it in July to coincide with the appointment timeframes, as most appointments are made in June. Staff is fine either way. I do think the second meeting is probably beneficial just to provide a little bit of cushion for timing. And then the additional text is added just to allow a procedure that's documented for if the chair resigns, then it talks about who's going to run the meeting, the vice chair would take over, and et cetera. So staff's happy to take any direction on that or listen to discussion, but I don't know, we can do it individually, or I can go through all the changes and then we can have the discussion.
I have a problem with the first one. I really think that we're making a mistake if we change it to January, because and one of the questions I didn't get answered today because I couldn't get hold of Cindy is that I want to know when they put out an application for new commissioners, because the next 2 years we have 2 commissioners that are going to be termed out in June, and I feel that that then you're saying if we're going to, you're really going to give somebody a 6-month term if they're going to be one of the termed out commissioners. And then you're going to have to then do it again in June when you get the new commission, or in July when you get the new commissioners, because they will be appointed in June. And I think the way it is now, I do agree with the second portion of that, that if someone resigns in the mid-year, then we would have to decide how we were going to handle that, and I think that that could be changed to that. But I really think that we should stay with the July date of appointing the new chairs. And I think that's the way it's always been done. And I did look at all the terms, and all the terms end in June, and so I think we're putting another layer on that I don't think we need.
I think that was our response to the fact that we just skipped over it, that it should have happened and what didn't. So rather than say we blew it, we're just going to we're going to wait a whole another year. The discussion was, okay, then let's just start it in January and catch up.
I remember differently. I remember that we said so that had been suggested, but I think Grace objected at that point too. And I remember saying, "Oh, why don't we do an interim until June?" And then since the year was up, and I don't know. I guess I'm the only one who remembers that, but that's what I remember.
I think it was just a fix because we didn't do it.
I because of the appointment in June, I tend to agree with Commissioner Kistner. I think we should. If we need to elect someone new because you've been here a year, then I think we should do an interim till June, and then have another election for the year term.
I'm comfortable either way. I'm comfortable. I think the rationale that Grace brings up makes perfect sense. I think you can chase your tail, and if we didn't do it, we didn't do it, and we got other things to worry about.
But we made a mistake.
Yeah, but I think you should address that some more. I think you put in our record, but I think your rationale around
I really looked at this, and then I went and looked at the committee and commission protocols, and I really feel that we're just doing something because we did mess it up. And if we're going to, I think if we're going to have this situation come up again, I think then we need to discuss how we want to handle that as a one-time thing rather than change something that's worked for a long time.
Or in the future, once you discover the error, you do what we didn't want to do then, which is just solve it.
Yeah.
So, but I hear where you're coming from.
So then there were no additional changes until we get to Rule 20, but I would like to go over Rule 14, which kind of talks about the procedural regular order of business for the Planning Commission, and I think this gets to some of the conversations that were had regarding the administrative decision or administrative determination.
Can I ask just one question before we jump on back to Rule 5? Unless I've missed it, we had never addressed in this document, although I know it's addressed, I think, Council, that our official record is the video. Does that, because this puts the onus on the secretary of creating the minutes, but our detailed record is not the minutes, it's really the video, correct?
That's 100% accurate, and there's, I think it's an excellent suggestion to amend the bylaws to include that, so that way it's communicated.
Not so much to us, but I know that we get people asking questions all the time.
Can I just ask a question about the written minutes? Why they are so sparse?
Action minutes, so I understand exactly what you're saying, and a lot of jurisdictions have gone to action minutes that are extremely sparse because the meetings are recorded and available to the public, and that's the record of the meeting is the video.
Right, but some people might not always want to sit down at their computer and watch video for 2 hours to really understand the discussion that occurred or what transpired, or what the general discussion was about anything. I mean, that would be my only comment. I'd be in favor of something that was a little less sparse in terms of the written format.
You can jump. I mean, the video is pretty well
Has chapters.
chaptered, and you can get pretty granular. I know. I agree with you on that, but again,
I also don't want to ask staff to do
Right.
even more
I was going
than
to say,
what they're.
as a staff member, when you're trying to do research and you go to the time before action minutes, it's very nice. Unfortunately, that was council direction, and it's pretty consistent with other municipalities across the
I
state.
think it would be worthwhile to maybe have better user instructions on the video. I mean, it takes, we look at them, so we now know how to jump around, but it isn't particularly intuitive if someone is not savvy. It might be just nice to put that up for the public.
Like me. I mean, I go from one end to the other, to the back and forth and back.
Oh, you should have seen him before that.
Yeah, but I mean, it might just be a nice in your free time to put that together.
Next time you have some free time, no.
But thank you for the suggestion, and I do completely acknowledge the difficulty of using the minutes sometimes for historical research. So getting to Rule 14, it's the procedures that the commission is to follow. There is this reports by staff and planning commission, and I have no problem adding to the reports that administrative decisions are to be included or administrative determinations to be included as a part of the department report. It could also be added as a separate section here, which may be more beneficial because it'll formalize it. So either way, from the commission standpoint, staff's happy to add that. If you look at Rule 14, it kind of talks about the entire process for the meetings to be run.
Right. What was the alternative to the report
Yeah, I misunderstood what
section?
you're asking us to decide on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Administrative determinations are actually already included in the procedures after sign permits because some sign permits are administrative determinations. So
So then you'll just flesh that out with more content, because we haven't had much content in
that's
it.
exactly right.
And then you kept agenda forecast?
Yes, and I wanted to get to that.
Okay.
So certain commissioners have asked for mechanisms to add items to the agenda. And discussing this with the city attorney, the agenda forecast is the appropriate location to put it. It was intentionally removed because there were consistent Brown Act violations that were occurring because the commission and staff were talking about future agenda items. So, but at the same time, having it in the procedures allow the commissioners to ask and recommend that a certain topic be put on the agenda for a future discussion. There can be no detailed conversation about that future action, but it could be proposed as a future agenda item and then would be voted on by the commission as to whether or not it would go onto the agenda. So staff's happy to leave that, but we will be very diligent in limiting those conversations to ensure we do not have any Brown Act violations, and just we would ask that the planning commissioners be respectful of direction from staff to minimize those.
Would that be a simple majority, or would it need to be consensus?
No, there's a vote
To
if
put
it's
it,
going
for
to
the
be on
vote
the
to put it
agenda.
on a future agenda?
I would imagine that would be a majority.
Majority,
Typical,
simple
typical
majority.
voting
Okay,
rules.
all right.
No concern over that. And staff will probably not be able to commit to a specific agenda date.
Right, of course.
Previously, German workloads and all those things, but we're happy to have that. And so that in review with the attorney and looking at the existing rules, that seemed to be the best mechanism to allow individual commissioners to voice a concern or a desire to have something heard, and then the commission to vote to support that or to not. So then basically the next change is Rule 20, and these are just some clarifications to try to streamline the process. So right now, and also codify existing practice. So right now we give 3 minutes of public comment. This says 5. Those types of things. There's also a little bit of could be seen as a little. The language could be a little bit sharp, and so rather than arguments in support of, that was deleted, and then also applicant's rebuttal, just applicant and staff response, and then roll call vote was added, and then some additional just kind of general caveats. So like under the note that the chair, the public, or the applicant can give further testimony if desired. And then I want to talk about ex parte communication a little bit. So ex parte communication or disclosure has never been included in this. And the definition of ex parte communication is additional factual information received by the commissioners or decision makers that goes into or affects that decision making. So visiting the site, speaking to the applicant, and speaking to neighbors. The goal is to disclose this at the outset of the public hearing to meet due process requirements, and then also to notify or allow anyone in the public to hear whatever other elements of information that you use to make your decision that aren't able to be provided here. So a site visit or a lack of a site.
With or without the applicant there.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Either way, that's something that was done to gain additional information. From staff's perspective, a site visit on land use decisions is very important, but then also coordinating a visit to that site when it's private property often requires a conversation with the property owner or the applicant's representative. Similarly, going to view a project site from a neighboring property, so someone who's concerned, often requires a communication with the neighbor, a visit to their property potentially to see their perspective. And so some communities do not allow ex parte communication. It's very much the exception to the rule. I know Commissioner Culberstein has kind of expressed some concern over it, but it does, from staff's perspective, facilitate review of development applications and kind of listening to neighbors. I didn't ask the city attorney what you would do if the decision was to not have ex parte communication as being allowed, what you would do if you got neighborhood comments, because you would still even have to disclose that you received an email, even if you didn't have any conversation about it. So I wasn't sure what would happen if the direction was to say to not have any of that, but that was just added to get everyone to formalize the disclosure of it.
And that definition, are you going to include that in the bylaws, or are you going to?
I wasn't going to.
All right.
No, I thought at one point we decided, I don't know if it was before you or not, that if we get email communications from either an applicant or somebody after them, that we would send them to the director, and the director would direct those out to everybody on the. And I think that we need to continue to do that.
Definitely.
Okay.
I have a couple of comments about this. I don't necessarily agree that a site visit without a communication is an ex parte communication. I don't have any problem saying at every meeting, I went and looked at the site. My concern here is talking to people, whether it's the applicant or somebody who supports or is in opposition, because that's really part of the record. And I think it should be disclosed here what was discussed, so that if an opponent told you this, that, and the other thing, the applicant has the ability to address that issue. If the applicant told you this, that, and the other thing, the audience is aware of it, and they have the ability to address it at the public meeting. I don't like the practice myself. I don't have a problem with everybody else doing it, but I think that the disclosure should be, this is what we discussed.
It's required. That's the 100%.
Well, I think it should be clear. Or maybe we just all
Maybe
understand.
that's what I'm getting with is the definition of what is required. I think needs to be included here, so that it's a little bit more. It's firmer in that you have.
Well, and
Because that hasn't been happening. I mean, we've
to
been
make-
saying,
Yeah,
I
we've
met
been
with the
saying we-
applicant, and he goes around the room, met with the applicant. But I think to Mary's point,
Is more of what was discussed.
Well, to make the distinction is if you got information that was above and beyond what's in the packet. So it's not, the retaining wall is going here, here's the 10-foot setback, as demonstrated on the plans. It's, and this is where we're thinking of some other feature or piece of information that's not included in the applicant's submittal. That's where you have to disclose. If it's already a part of the record, then it's part of the record and you talked about the record. If it's something that's new, then it needs to be disclosed, because it gets to exactly the point you're trying to make, that the public needs to understand all elements of what was included in the decision, and that does put the onus on commissioners.
Well, I also think it puts more onus on the applicants, because I think that they've got to give you more information than they're giving you if they're going to give us something when we visit that they think is going to sway us in their direction, then I think that needs to be in the staff report. And I think we need to have more comprehensive information coming from the applicants on something like that.
Could we entertain, I mean, because I think, because today, St. Helena allows for ex parte communication, and I think to Commissioner Culberstein's point, that by not doing it, it really protects that gray area of what is said. Do we disclose everything? Do we not disclose everything? I would like, as a commissioner, the ability to maybe say, you know, it is not required. You know, that St. Helena, we do not require commissioners, because we get pressure from applicants like, you didn't call me back. You know, I have people that if I simply can't schedule it between the time that we get our packet and see, because I don't like to meet with them before I've seen the record, and that St. Helena does not require commissioners meet in advance with applicants or opponents or neighbors. However, if they do, X, Y, and Z disclosure needs to be made.
Yeah, I think you should disclose everything. You could just say, we discussed everything in the staff report. You know, but obviously if you're meeting with a proponent or an opponent, none of that, unless there's a letter.
Right.
That's right.
None of that would have been disclosed in the staff report.
You're not talking about disclosing expressions of personal feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's exactly. It's record.
So then so then when if you do, you have to is there and you're talking about emails. What if most of the emails that we get from people
You should forward each of those to Noah and Cindy immediately.
are addressed to everyone, you know. So most
Not
of them-
always.
Not
No,
always.
not
though.
always.
I know it. That's what I'm saying. So,
I called just before I came over here tonight.
well, what I'm thinking, there's nothing on the website or anything that says, you know. I guess it's up to us then to write back to people and tell them that, you know, before I answer you, before we go any further, you need to know that whatever is said here is going to need to be shared with everybody, with the staff and everybody
Well,
else.
that's the whole point of it going. That's why we have the city email addresses, because everything that's on those city email addresses is public record. It is accessible.
Correct.
And if you were to go to meet with a proponent or opponent and they shared information with you, whether it's a personal opinion or a fact of what their intent is, that's not in any of the records, that's ex parte communication that should be disclosed.
Yeah.
And as soon as it comes to me, if it's from just a person, I have to do it. I have no choice. All I
legally
all I
required.
can do is let the person know what you've just said is going to be.
And you could preface your meetings with, this is
Oh,
a
of course I
meeting
would
as
do
a
that.
planning
Yeah,
commissioner.
of course
I'm
I would do
required to
that.
disclose any information you give me that's not already in the record.
Exactly.
So
It's the ones that are coming when I don't have a chance to do that before they disclose something. Yeah.
What about answering people when they ask you a question?
you can't prejudge a decision, so you can't say, you know, I support that. But you can talk about how it's in keeping with established city policies. No problem with that.
Or you can tell them what code to look at?
Definitely. That's just informational.
Yeah.
Can you answer questions about have things like this been approved before or in situation? Because that's the question I get a lot.
Well, and I
does
think
the city
that's-
like this kind of building? Are they looking for this type of use?
If you're referencing a previous decision that was made in a public hearing, of course. Yeah. But I mean, so in having this conversation with the city attorney, I said, you know, I'm obviously not an attorney. I can communicate this, but he is completely willing and open to come to a planning commission meeting or to have individual discussions to answer any questions you have. And he expressed his willingness and support for any of that, because the goal is to make it as clear as possible. But it is, I mean, it's on individuals to make that decision, and you never know what somebody's going to say to you when you go to meet with them. I mean, that's completely right.
So when a lot of times people ask me what sorts of things should I, be looking for, and I'll say, water, traffic, noise, all of that. Is that I have to disclose that as well? That I've told them those. Or is that objective enough to?
Again, it gets back to additional factual information that you received that goes into or affects your decision making.
This is why this is such a quagmire.
Yeah.
You know, this is why I don't do it.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be talking to the applicant or anybody else. But I understand, some people find it very helpful. But I think we should have the fullest disclosure possible. The other thing I think it does that I probably should have talked about earlier in the rules, is I've seen a number of applicants come here and they make almost no presentation because they have talked to everybody already. And so our presentation is essentially the staff. And it's really the burden on the applicant to come here, talk about what they want to do, answer our questions, and we end up with very abbreviated applicant presentations because of all these meetings that occur. I shouldn't say because, but I think that makes people assume that they don't have to say much when they arrive at the meeting. And I think that's regrettable.
And I agree with you. But that's another reason I feel that we've got to have all the
Microphone.
things in the packet,
Grace,
all the
microphone.
plans and everything, not just...
Grace,
somebody's-
microphone.
I got a big mouth.
Yeah, but this is the official record.
All I'm saying is that's why I think that the packets have to have all everything in them that would be required to make a decision. And when I can't read some of this stuff, some of this stuff is just impossible to even figure out what they want. Yeah, thank you. I have one of those too, Mary, but it doesn't always work that way.
I just think the applicant should be advised by the staff that it's their burden to come to the meeting and make a record at the meeting. It's not the staff's job to do that. We appreciate your report, but you're not their advocate necessarily.
And some of that is probably just historical expectations and historical trends, and I completely agree with you.
Well, I think previous commissioners, some current commissioners, do meet extensively with applicants. And so if the precedent is set and then we get a call and say, no, I prefer to have record delivered the night of the commission, we're viewed as being kind of obstructive or not open to meeting our demands or our requirements as a public servant and all the things. And so I just like the idea of having a delineation in there that says it's not required. It's
no problem.
I agree with you, Tracy, because I think there are the house. Oh God, what street was it on? I think it was Allen that was the historical house. Until I saw the inside of it, I don't think you would have a drawing that I could have understood that house. That was the one that part of it was lower and it had the different siding and without seeing it, I don't think that they could have. I don't think we'd have come up with the kind of decision we did, and I think it was a good decision. Now I see the house, I know it's a good decision. But
I'm a little confused here about the Brown. I remember one time, and I was absolutely horrified. There was a letter that came that was addressed to everyone, and I answered it, copied to everyone. And then, you remember this, and then it was like, my God, you violated the Brown Act.
You did.
So, okay. So I did, and I was appalled. So anyway, so now I get a letter that's to everyone. I answer only the person, but am I supposed to be sending that to you to give to everyone, or what?
Yes.
Okay, so now I send any answer to the person and you, and then you can violate the Brown Act.
I'm not sure you should answer.
No, he's not going to send us your letter.
But it becomes
Of course I'm going to answer if somebody writes to me.
Yeah, you could.
I usually just say, thank you for I'm in receipt of your letter. I will consider it seriously. That's what I say.
So I'm not on the planning commission, and my job is to
I know it,
essentially.
yeah.
But so what that means is it's a Brown Act violation. For me, providing individual information to all of the commissioners is different than the commissioners holding a serial meeting, which is essentially a discussion outside of this room.
This chamber.
I understand. So, and certainly if I do that, I will advise the.
A good
person
example,
writing to
Bobby,
me.
is that when any of us have a question, we email Noah. If he feels that it's important for the rest of the commission to know, he will email out that information.
Just like you emailed the stuff you
like
sent
just
last
this-
Friday.
Just talking about
But that is
acknowledging.
different. He's not going to say you respond to an applicant. He's not going to send your letter to us because that's
Well,
just how
that's what
it
he
spoke.
said.
He's
Oh,
not
you know.
going to
It's
send
the
us what you
thought
said.
you
He's going to
said
say a commissioner has these concerns and here's the address of those. But he's not going to say to us what you said to the applicant.
That's
right?
what I just asked, and I.
But
misunderstood
wouldn't
your
that have
answer.
to
You're
be
not.
disclosed anyway? I mean, wouldn't her
think so.
response?
I mean, that's what you.
It will all go into the public record that's available for
Yes,
the public
it
to
will go
review
to you.
and as a part of the file.
So it will go to you. And I mean, what I'm usually do is just acknowledge having received it and assure them that I will consider it. That I need to send that to you, and then you need to send that to everyone. Is that what you're saying?
No, if you get information provided to you that's pertinent to the review of the project, you should forward that information on.
But the situation is usually everyone has had gotten in, including you. I get emails that have been addressed to everyone. I'm talking about my response.
If you're providing
usually my
information that's
response
pertinent to the decision, I need to be a part of it so
Okay,
we
so
can
if
provide
it's-
it to everyone. If you're saying thank you for your concerns, I don't need to.
You
see
don't
that.
need, all right, thank you.
Yeah, it's a form of ex parte communication from you to the other person.
That's correct.
And
And then that's, and so
I
then
mean,
you
I would discourage
disclose-
it.
Yeah, and then you would disclose, I got an email from X, Y, or Z, and I responded
Well, you
to
can
it.
see I did because my name's on the top.
right, but
But so you want
But
me to
if
send
I
this
don't,
to?
well, yeah, I don't need to, but if you want that to be a part of the public record, that then everyone can see to know that that information went into the decision, that's one thing. If you want to disclose, I got an email from X person that helped me make my decision, but not everyone saw it, then that's different.
Okay, I'm talking about the emails that everyone sees and my acknowledgement of receiving it.
I do not need to see
You
that.
do not need to see it.
And the concerns come to everyone. If it includes me, then I have it. If it doesn't, please forward it. So then, because that is part of the record that all the planning commissioners all use to make their decision. Okay. So what I'm thinking now is I'll define ex parte communication, probably with an asterisk there below the note, and then identify that it's not a requirement. The meetings with applicants, members of the public, et cetera.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Not required of us.
Yeah,
Just
not
so
required of
applicants-
planning
That we're
commissioners.
not required to meet with them.
Just so applicants see that if they, that it's not part of our responsibility and requirement to respond to and meet with every applicant that asks.
No, I agree with that.
I just like that
but
delineated, so.
I just think that there should also be something in here about the disclosure that's
Yeah,
going to be required, the nature of it and
And that's the
and what it
definition part.
is.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, as far as these emails, I think it is another communication, and I think the easy answer is to just say, thank you for your email.
Goodbye.
Period. Because otherwise, you're kind of getting into that
I hear it.
off-the-record stuff.
Or at least
I
the
agree.
gray area of it anyway.
That's just so cold. I always like to acknowledge, and it's true. I mean, what I'm saying is true. That I'm going to consider what they've said. But I hear what you're saying. It's better.
Well, that's my point of just stick it in there. It's not required, you might not hear back. Move on. Don't take it personally.
Yeah, I mean, I've sent emails to people and they've responded. I mean, I've just told them, it's not my practice to do this. Thank you for your invitation, but I'm not going to come and meet with you at your house or whatever. And I get something back, fine, I understand.
So the next bylaw that has any change is just rule number 23, essentially just clarifying the last sentence. Another section was added just so a tie vote or deadlock constitutes a denial unless the applicant requests a continuance of the item to a subsequent meeting at which a quorum is present. And then just to clarify, prior to a vote to deny.
So it'd have to be before the vote. was
Exactly.
taken.
So they don't request a continuance after a denial. So that's just pure clarification.
Can we go back to Rule 22, which does talk about the continuance?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you.
So it's unclear to me, can a continuance occur on the motion of the commission without the request of the applicant?
Of course.
It doesn't say that here.
That's correct. Before, this was talking about withdrawing the application. So staff just identified or requested continuance. So they can say, rather than actually withdrawing, they can also ask for you to continue it to allow them to make some additional revisions to address your concerns.
That's what happened today.
I think the commission having the ability to vote on a continuance is probably in another bylaw, or it's identified in the zoning code as a procedural part of a review. But
Well, I think we could just add something to 22 that on its own motion, the commission can continue something, by a majority vote.
I agree. That came up one night recently. I think that came up in the last few meetings.
so what's the recommended language?
I would just add something to Rule 22, just add, the commission, on its own motion may also continue a matter.
I don't know if I would put it under
Without
the
the cons-
conduct of public hearings. I think I would put it under agenda. It's more of a,
Wait, this is Rule 22.
22.
I understand that,
Okay.
but I'm saying that your suggestion that the commission can vote to continue an item, are you saying during the presentation of it or prior to?
She's,
During
as I understand,
presentation.
as I understand what Mary's trying to do, is because we're speaking to continuances here, she's trying to say it's not just the applicant that can create, but I think because this was really fixing a fact that this was only talking about withdrawing, and Noah's giving them, say, you don't just have to withdraw, you can just continue it, could we just make another rule in here, renumber them, that just says, the commission may also determine.
This seems like the.
I'm sorry,
place
I
to
thought that
put
you
it.
meant just not hearing an item, just saying, I'd like to continue this because of X, Y, Z.
I understand the direction. I'd like to look at what the zoning code says and then the other bylaws, but I understand and Will can provide
So you're,
clarification on that.
let me,
Just
I need,
codify that we can do.
But let me ask you this, why would we do a continuance unless the applicant wanted one?
because we wanted to last time.
A very good example was the Harvest Inn,
Because we
where there
weren't all
was
here.
a deadlock. I personally suggested one in the case of the Spring Street home because I felt we need a little more information. I mean, the applicant, I think, felt differently, that maybe she had everything there and we should just vote. I think with some additional information, I may reach a different decision. So in that case, I felt like I suggested it.
Yeah, and I think I'm wondering where you're going to be looking. I mean, because what I'm hearing you say is that it should say something like the commission can ask for a continuance without the consent of the applicant. Is that what you're saying? Because that's what I'm hearing. Yeah, so.
So, I understand, and we'll look into some language that'll codify that. And,
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And yeah, sorry for skipping that. That was a change. And then, so Rule 23, just basically saying prior to a vote to deny, just adding some clarifications to the very last sentence. And then the only other change, which is kind of a standard catch-all, is for Rule 34 was added. And then, so basically, if we make a mistake in following these bylaws or procedures, it doesn't negate the decision that was made where that vote was.
So just kind of cleaning up Rule 32?
Well, that's true,
typical
except for
catch-all.
maybe Rule 23. I mean, voting is voting. We can't
Exactly.
make a mistake and.
Which is why compliance with all established laws is the intro. But, yeah, so thank you very much. So staff is hearing to keep the June date. Add a note that the video is the official record.
The July date.
I'm sorry, July date. Add some changes or some additional information to Rule 20 regarding ex parte. Add some clarification regarding the commission's right to continue a project, or at least make sure it's clear.
Or offer it.
A good summary?
All right. And so you're going to make those changes and bring these back to us one more time?
That's
To
exactly
go to city
right.
council? All right, just want to make that clear. Perfect. All right, moving on, it's the vote for the chairperson and the vice chair. I'm assuming that we're going to have an interim person until July.
Well,
Wait.
did we just said not
I
to?
thought we just
Oh,
decided.
you want, okay, I thought that. All right, okay.
But just do it in June,
Isn't
just
that
leave it
kinda
the
what
way it
we
is,
decided?
unless,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, all right, okay.
if that's
then-
okay with everybody.
That's-
Do
yeah.
you want a
Maybe
motion on
July
that?
before you
No?
I'm fine
I
with
just,
that.
Are you?
yeah.
We should ask the chair if she's willing to.
Just,
Will you do
do
it, Sarah?
do
Have
we,
you already cleaned out your boxes?
do we want to rotate? Who wants to rotate with me every once in a while? It's really nice.
chair.
It's really nice to just be a commissioner every once in a while and just get to actually have an opinion and not have to follow like policy and be quiet because you don't want to antagonize anyone. Oh, all right. Okay. Well, then we have department report. And then also, no, before you get into that, do you mind sharing the sheet that you gave to Grace and I at our last meeting with the other commissioners, and also with the upcoming projects? I feel like that would be really helpful for them to know what's down the pipeline.
Sure, no problem. So we can kind of with agenda forecasting. So staff keeps kind of a running list of things that are pending, must be addressed, and then projects. And we discussed that with the chair and the vice chair at meetings prior to the meeting, just to keep them
I just felt that our
informed.
last meeting was kind of really heavy and really good to know what everything's coming the next. Don't go on vacation.
There are a lot of things coming down, and I have no problem sharing it, just with the caveat that the dates that are put next to those items are flexible. Okay, good. No problem. And tonight, staff didn't have much of a report. Thank you very much for a good meeting. I just wanted to say thank you again to Xenia for coming and helping, learning the process.
We look forward to spending many Tuesdays with you. Don't listen to her. All right, perfect. All right, well, thank you so much, and this meeting is adjourned.